Hi, today I'm covering something a little bit different. I'm starting a brand new series, one which I hope you find fun, entertaining, and a good change of pace. And while it's still Space Marines, it's not their legions or any specific chapter. Even heroes aren't going to be covered here, but rather, I'm going to be covering, or at least giving a brief overview, of the homeworlds of the Primarchs and their Space Marines. Starting from the top with number 1, Caliban. This was an Imperial Death World located in the northern Segmentum Obscurus and just to the north of the Eye of Terror. Now its history is one of cruel, harsh regions filled with great beasts who had been mutated by the warp into monstrosities that required the development of knightly houses in order to fight them off. This would actually classify the world as a feudal world, despite them having rather advanced technology which allowed them to recreate something similar to Space Marine armor. As this world was mostly wild and the few population centers ruled by small elite warrior houses, which for some reason took an incredible amount of inspiration in both form and function to European knights of Earth's ancient past, Caliban was less stratified socially, which greatly stagnated its development. However, the technology it did have access to included chainswords, bolt weapons, and the ability to manufacture them at scale. Unfortunately for them, it seems that almost all other technology was lost to the Calibanite civilization due to the warp storms that completely changed its flora and fauna into nightmarish abominations that would constantly overrun settlements, destroy population centers, and necessitate the knightly orders to often go on slaying quests. Now, once the Emperor found the world, and his son Lionel Johnson, Primarch of the First Legion, the Dark Angels, Caliban would be remodeled into a world more befitting of the Imperium. However, its society and its civilization would not be stripped as bare as many of the worlds that did not have Space Marine legions recruiting from it. Unfortunately, as the Horus Heresy occurred and ended, Caliban would be destroyed in the conflict between Luther, along with his chaos-corrupted fallen angels, and their Primarch Lionel Johnson and his Loyalist Dark Angels. This occurred shortly after the end of the Horus Heresy and the Siege of Terra, when Lionel Johnson and the Dark Angels directly under his command, around half the Legion, were fired upon when making orbit around Caliban by its very advanced orbital defense systems. Confused about what was going on, the Primarch of the First Legion would pull back his vessels just outside of the reach of the Caliban's defense systems. Upon doing this, he quickly learned that his mentor and best friend, Luther, had ordered Caliban's defenses to fire upon the Dark Angel fleet, and that he had somehow gotten around half the Legion to follow in these orders, leading not just the Lion but the remaining Dark Angels to believe that Luther and the Dark Angels that were left to garrison and protect Caliban had fallen to the temptations of the Dark Gods and joined the traitor Astartes. This left the Lion to order something that had become incredibly common for him: orbital bombardments upon population centers and defensive positions, mercilessly targeting the planet's tectonic plates, cracking the very world that raised him. Eventually, the Lion goes to his fortress-monastery and faces off against Luther. Strangely enough, this mere pseudo-Astartes, since Luther had never been elevated to a true Astartes, was able to fight the Lion on an equal footing. However, this equal footing would eventually give way to the greater power and resolve of a Primarch, causing Luther to be put down on one knee. And just about when he was going to be slain on bended knee by his pseudo-brother/protege, the Lion found himself unable to slay his foster father. And in that moment, Luther lashed out with a psychic attack. However, this is just as the Dark Gods had planned, causing him to fall to his knees in sorrow. The ruinous powers, being so enraged at having lost control of one of their puppets, blasted the world with a mighty warp storm that wreaked havoc upon the world's surface. This led one of the mightiest fortresses of humanity, Caliban, to break apart under the undiluted strain of the four craven gods turning their ire upon the world, alongside the geological damage that the Dark Angels' own orbital bombardment had caused, leading the world to implode. However, the primary fortress-monastery of the Dark Angels, with some of the most powerful gravitic force fields, survived this detonation and somehow had an atmosphere. And it would become the new home of the Dark Angels, a mobile space fortress built around the Tower of the Angels, but more colloquially known as the Rock, from which they would operate evermore. However, 10 millennia later, Vastor the Archophane corrupted the space debris of Caliban with his advanced sorcery, transforming it into a mobile planetoid which he dubbed Wormwood. This was a dark mockery of Caliban, as it now was bathed, roiling and producing mass amounts of warp-based madness and infernal demonic technology. Wormwood would then be heavily garrisoned by the cult of the Archophane, alongside Vastor's other allies, and further still, within the heart of the remains of Caliban's restructured form, was a subdimension, which would be used to house the assorted components of the Discordance engine, the Ouroboros, the Plague Heart, and eventually the Tchula. Now, during the Battle of Idolotros, Wormwood would be redirected into the Somnium Stars, and used as the center of Vastor's plans to acquire the Tchula from the Rock. Now, the Dark Angels would take offense to this, and they would act in a manner that, while they did indeed harm Vastor, his plan in acquiring the last fragment of an item known as a key, Vastor absconded back to Wormwood, converting the planetoid into a roving fortress which not even the Rock could harm, as it began to use its power to create a fissure between the Materium and the Warp. However, eventually, Wormwood would vanish from the Imperial's areas of operation. However, this reforged remains of Caliban would draw dark pilgrimages, drawn by strange visions and the desires of those who are aligned with chaos, who desired to glean Vastor's blessings, allowing them to establish strongholds amongst Wormwood's perilous environment. And not only were mortals now living there, but a myriad of demonic entities now reside in the reforged remnants of Caliban. Since you made it to the end, thank you. But I gotta ask, could you please help me show YouTube that this video and my channel in general isn't just brain rot by hitting the like button, subscribing, and leaving a comment, especially since a comment would help me gauge what you want to watch, and because it really does help me in the algorithm, since I'm going up against so much AI content, and every little bit helps. Again, I cannot express how thankful I am for joining me in my favorite part of the hobby, the community side.